Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in the world of Torah. I want to begin by acknowledging that this is Veterans Day, so I'd like to start tonight, as we should every day, by thanking those who have served this country by serving in one of the branches of our military armed forces. Thank you all very much for serving all of us in that way and placing yourselves in jeopardy to ensure freedom and liberty and well-being of all of us. Thank you all very much. And we're going to take a look at our Torah portion, which is Vayetzei, which begins in chapter 28 with verse 10 of the book of Genesis. We'll read through our English translation. We will have a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our general conversation. And if you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, we can all together recite our blessing for this opportunity of immersing ourselves in the world of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
melech haolam,
asher
kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We begin book of Genesis, chapter 28, with verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He came upon a certain place and stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. He had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached to the sky, and angels of God were going up and down on it. And Adonai was standing beside him, and God said, I am Adonai, the God of your father, Abraham, and the God of Isaac. The ground on which you are lying, I will assign to you and to your offspring. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Verse 16. And Sherry, would you like to read a little bit at verse 16?
Thank you. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is present in this place, and I did not know of it. Shaken, he said, how awesome is this place. There is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He named that site Bethel, but previously the name of the city had been Luz.
Thank you so much. Steve, would you like to read a little bit that begins at verse 20?
Jacob then made a vow, saying, if God remains with me, if he protects me on this journey that I am making, and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safe to my father's house, the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's abode, and of all that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to read a little bit the start of chapter 29?
Jacob resumed his journey and came to the land of the Easterners. There, before his eyes, was a well in the open. 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it, where the flocks were watered from the well. The stone in the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the stone would be rolled from the mouth of the well, and the sheep watered. Then the stone would be put back in its place on the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, my friends, where are you from? And they said, we're from Haran. He said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, yes, we do. He continued, is he well? They answered, he is. And there is his daughter Rachel coming with the flock. He said, it is still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals, water the flock and take them to pasture. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are rounded up. Then the stone is rolled off the mouth of the well and we water the sheep.
Thank you. Hannah, would you like to read a little bit at verse 9?
Well, while he was still talking with them, Rachel arrived with her father's sheep. She was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, with his uncle Laban's flock, Jacob went over and rolled the stone off the well's mouth and watered his uncle Laban's flock. Now, Jacob kissed Rachel and began to cry in a loud voice. Jacob then told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father.
Why'd you finish 13?
Upon hearing the news of his sister's son, Jacob, Laban ran to greet him, hugging and kissing him. He brought him into his house. And then Jacob told Laban everything that had happened. And Laban said to him, truly, you are my bone and my flesh. So he stayed with him a whole month.
Thank you. Margot, would you like to read starting at verse 15?
Laban said to Jacob, just because you are a kinsman, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and the name of the younger one was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel. He answered, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, rather that I give her to you than that I should give her to an outsider. Stay with me. So Jacob stayed 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her.
Thank you so much. Dave Lev, would you like to read starting at verse 21?
Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time was fulfilled, that I may cohabit with her. And Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. When evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her. Laban had given his maidservant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her maid. When morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I was in your service for Rachel. Why did you deceive me? Laban said, it is not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the older. Wait until the bridal week of this one is over, and we will give you that one too, provided you serve me another 7 years. Jacob did so, and he waited out the bridal week of the one, and then he gave him his daughter Rachel as a wife. Laban had given his maidservant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid, and Jacob cohabited with Rachel also. Indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served him another 7 years.
Thank you, Dave. Barry, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 31?
Abishai saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and named him Reuben, for she declared, it means the Lord has seen my affliction. It also means, now my husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son, and declared, this is because Adonai heard that I was unloved, and has given me this one also. So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and declared, this time my husband will become attached to me, for I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi. She conceived again bore a son, and declared, "This time I will praise Adonai." Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped bearing.
Thank you, Barry.
Mhm.
Steve Renton, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 30?
Okay, thank you. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing children to Jacob, Rachel came to envy her sister. She said to Jacob, "Let me have children, otherwise I am a dead woman." Jacob grew angry with Rachel and said, Am I in place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" But she said, "Here is my name Bilhah, my maid Bilhah. Couple with her, and let her give birth on my knees, so that I too may have a son through her." So she gave him her maid Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob coupled with her. Bilhah became pregnant and bore a son to Jacob. Rachel said, "God has judged me and has also listened to my plea and given me a son." She therefore named him Dan. And again, Rachel's maid Bilhah became pregnant. She bore a second son to Jacob. Rachel then said, "A mighty rivalry have I waged with my sister. Moreover, I have prevailed." She therefore named him Naphtali.
Thank you, Steve. Paul, would you like to read starting at verse 9?
Thank you, Rabbi. When Leah saw that she had stopped giving birth, she took Zilpah, her maidservant, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore Jacob a son, and Leah declared, "Good luck has come." So she called his name Gad. Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore a second son to Jacob. Leah declared, "In my good fortune, for women have deemed me fortunate." So she called his name Asher. Reuben went out in the days of the wheat harvest. He found dudaim in the field and brought them to Leah, his mother. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give some of your sons dudaim." But she said to her, "Was your taking my husband insignificant? And now to take even my son's dudaim?" Rachel said, "Therefore he shall lie with you tonight in return for your son's dudaim." When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "It is to me that you must come, for I have clearly hired you with my son's dudaim." So he lay with her that night. God hearkened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And Leah declared, "God has granted me my reward, because I gave my maidservant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will make his permanent home with me, for I have borne him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter, and she called her name Dinah.
Thank you, Paul. Mark Thompson, would you like to read at verse 22?
Thank you. Now God remembered Rachel, and God heeded her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, "God has taken away my disgrace." So she named him Joseph, which is to say, "May Adonai add another son for me." After Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Give me leave to go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for well you know what services I have rendered you." But Laban said to him, "If you will indulge me, I have learned by divination that Adonai has blessed me on your account." And he continued, "Name the wages due from me, and I will pay you." But he said, "You know well how I served you and how your livestock has fared with me. For the little you had before I came has grown too much. So since the Adonai has blessed you wherever I turn. And now, when shall I make provision for my own household?" He said, "What shall I pay you?" And Jacob said, "Pay me nothing. If you will do this thing for me, I will again pasture and keep your flocks. Let me pass through your whole flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted animal, every dark-colored sheep, and every spotted and speckled goat. Such shall be my wages. In the future, when you go over my wages, let my honesty toward you testify for me. If there are among my goats that are not speckled or spotted, or any sheep that are not dark colored, they got there by theft. And Laban said, very well, let it be as you say.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark Levinstein, would you like to read starting at verse 35? And you'll need to unmute, Mark. Thank you.
You may regret my unmuting, but here we go. Thank you. But that same day, he removed the streaked and spotted he-goats and all the speckled and spotted she-goats, everyone that had white on it, and all the dark-colored sheep. And he left them in charge of his sons. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. Jacob then got fresh shoots of poplar and of almond and plane, and peeled white stripes in them, laying bare the white of the shoots. The rods that he had peeled, he set up in front of the goats in the troughs, the water receptacles that the goats came to drink from. Their mating occurred when they came to drink. And since the goats mated by the rods, the goats brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted young. Jacob dealt separately with the sheep. He made these animals face the streaked or wholly dark-colored animals in Laban's flock. And so he produced special flocks for himself, which he did not put with Laban's flocks. Moreover, when the sturdier animals were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the troughs in full view of the animals, so that they mated by the rods. But with the feebler animals, he would not place them there. Thus the feeble ones went to Laban, and the sturdy to Jacob. So the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to his own large flocks, maidservants and menservants, camels and asses.
Thank you, Mark. Robin, would you like to read the start of chapter 31?
Yes, thank you. Jacob now heard the words of Laban's sons. They were saying, Jacob has taken all that belongs to our father. It is from our father's possessions that he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw Laban's countenance. Plainly, it was no longer favorable to him as before. So Adonai said to Jacob, return to the land of your ancestors, to your birthplace, and I shall be with you. Jacob therefore summoned Rachel and Leah to the field, to his flocks, and said to them, when I look at your father's countenance, it no longer is favorable to me as in days gone by, but the God of my father has been with me. Now you are aware that I have labored with all my strength for your father, but your father has deceived me, changing my pay 10 times, though God has not let him harm me. So that if he said, the spotted shall be your pay, the flocks bore spotted. And if he said, the streaked shall be your pay, the flocks bore streaked. God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. One time when the flocks were in heat, in a dream I looked up and saw that the male goats mounting the flock were streaked, spotted, and dappled. In that dream, an angel of God said to me, Jacob, here I am, said I. The angel said, pray look up, see how the male goats mounting the flocks are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban has done to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a monument, where you made me a vow. Now get up, leave this land, and return to your native land.
Thank you so much, Robin. Gary, would you like to read starting at verse 14?
Rachel and Leah made this response to him. Have we any longer a portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not like the foreigners to him? He sold us and has completely eaten up our money, since all the wealth that God has taken away from our father is ours and our children's. So now do just what God has commanded you. Jacob then got up and mounted his sons and his wives on camels. He drove all his livestock and all his possessions that he had acquired. The livestock and his possessions that he had acquired in Padam Aram to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. While Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel had stolen her father's household gods, and Jacob had deceived Laban, the Aramean, by not informing him that he was fleeing. Jacob fled with all that was his, going up, crossing the river, and setting his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Not until the third day was Laban told that Jacob had fled. He then took his kin with him and pursued Jacob, a 7-day trek, and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. God then came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream of the night, saying to him, "Beware, lest you speak to Jacob, beginning well, but ending ill."
Okay, thank you. And Susan and David, would you like to pick up at verse 25?
Yes, thank you. 25?
Yes.
Okay. And Laban caught up with Jacob, and Jacob had pitched his tent on the height, and Laban had pitched with his kinsmen in the high country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, deceiving me and driving my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee in stealth and deceive me and not tell me? I would have sent you off with festive songs, with timbrel and lyre, and you did not let me kiss my sons and my daughters. Oh, you have played the fool. My hand has the might to do you harm. But the God of your father said to me last night, 'Watch yourself, lest you speak to Jacob either good or evil.' And so you had to go because you longed so much for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" And Jacob answered and said to Laban, "For I was afraid, for I thought you would rob me of your daughters. With whomever you find your gods, that person shall not live. Before our kinsmen, make recognition of what is yours with me and take it."
And Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban came in Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and in the two maids' tent, and he did not find them. And he came out from Leah's tent and came to Rachel's tent. And Rachel had taken the teraphim and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. And Laban felt around the whole tent and did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let it not offend in my Lord's eyes that I am not able to get up before you, because I have the way of women." And he searched and did not find the teraphim. And Jacob was angered, and he quarreled with Laban. And Jacob answered, and he said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you blazed after me, that you felt around all my belongings? What did you find out of all your house's belongings? Set it here in front of my brothers and your brothers, and let them judge between the two of us."
Thank you, David. Let me ask, Justin, would you like to read starting at verse 38?
Thank you, Rabbi. Already 20 years I have been with you, and your ewes and she-goats have not aborted, neither have I eaten the rams of your flocks. I have not brought home to you anything torn by other animals. I would suffer its loss. From my hand you would demand it. What was stolen by day and what was stolen at night? I was in the field by day when the heat consumed me, and the frost at night, and my sleep wandered from my eyes. This is 20 years that I have spent in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your animals, and you changed my wages 10 times. Had not the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac been for me, you would not have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the toil of my hands, and he reproved you last night.
Thank you, Justin. Let me invite Jay. Would you like to read starting at verse 43?
43?
Yes.
Thank you, Rabbi. Then Laban spoke up
and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All that you see is mine. Yet what can I do now about my daughters or the children they were born? Come then, let us make a pact, you and I, that there may be a witness between you and me. Thereupon Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. So they took stones and made a mound, and they partook of a meal there by the mound. Laban named it Yegar Sahadutha, but Jacob named it Gil'ed. And Laban declared, this mound is a witness between you and me this day. That is why it was named Gil'ed. And it was called Mizpah because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of sight of each other. If you ill-treat my daughters or take other wives besides my daughters, though no one else may be about, remember God himself will be witness between you and me.
Thank you, Jay.
And Laban, okay, you're welcome.
And Laban said to Jacob, here is the mound, and here the pillar which I have set up between you and me. This mound shall be witness, and this pillar shall be witness, that I am not to cross to you past this mound, and that you are not to cross to me past this mound and this pillar with hostile intent. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, their ancestral deities, judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Jacob then offered up a sacrifice on the height and invited his kinsmen to partake of the meal. After the meal, they spent the night on the height. And then, Margot, would you like to read the last few verses there?
Certainly, happily. Early in the morning, Laban kissed his sons and daughters and bade them goodbye. Then Laban left on his journey homeward. Jacob went on his way, and angels of God encountered him. When he saw them, Jacob said, this is God's camp. So he named the place Mahanaim.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our collective conversation. So first, if you have a study sheet, I invite you to take it out so we can look at the image of the painting that I have at the top. It's a painting by Helen Frankenthaler. Helen Frankenthaler was mid-20th century abstract expressionist artist. She grew up in New York City. She grew up in relatively privileged family. Her father was a state Supreme Court judge. She herself went to a couple of the elite private schools in New York. She went to first Brearley School, which is where my sister went. She then went to the Dalton School, which is just a few blocks from where I grew up. And after that, she went to Bennington College, where she studied art. And although she came from this rather privileged and well-off family, when she left Bennington, she joined the artist community down in Greenwich Village that was a site of great creativity at the time. Helen Frankenthaler, while she studied with and worked with and lived among the abstract expressionist artists at the time, she herself actually developed a rather unique way of painting. She greatly diluted her oil paints and then would pour it onto the canvas so that it was almost thin as watercolor. And she would move the colors around, and the colors would then sink down into the canvas material itself. So this is what she wrote about this particular work of art that she created, I believe, in 1957. She said, the picture developed bit by bit while I was working on it into shapes symbolic of an exuberant figure and ladder, and therefore Jacob's ladder, which is the name of this painting. When I read what she wrote about this work of art, it struck me that what she was saying is that when she started creating this work of art, she had no real prescribed meaning that was going to emerge out of the painting. She had no preconceived narrative that she was seeking to portray. It's almost as if she created this work of art, and then as she looked at it and thought about it and reflected about it, the meaning of the painting emerged for her. So it's almost as if the painting was for her, as much as it is for any of us who view it, an invitation to an experience and an invitation to find meaning. Well, we're going to explore a little bit this notion about how sometimes meaning is something that we bring to a moment, and sometimes meaning is something that we extract from a moment. So just to remind ourselves of the narrative that's occurring in our text, remember from last week that Jacob departs from home, and as he does so, it's clear that he's leaving behind a certain void within the family encampment. We're clear that his father is missing him, his mother is missing him, and this notion of a void that he's leaving behind in the family home, it's almost as if he's carrying that void within him. And so the journey that he's now going to be going on is one in which is filled with uncertainty. So we're going to see how he begins to fill perhaps this void within him, this sense of uncertainty that he's carrying with him as he leaves home. We're going to look at an early part of our Torah portion from chapter 29, verse 20, which is, as Jacob has worked for Rachel. We have this verse. Jacob worked for Rachel for 7 years. They were in his eyes as only a few days because of his love for her. So a lot of commentators, they look at this and they say, well, what does that mean that these 7 years were really only a few days? Is that because, as some commentators have pointed out, well, because he had a real purpose in this labor that he was doing, which is to marry this woman and eventually to return home? Or did they appear as few days in his eyes, these 7 years, only as he looked back upon it years later? So sometimes that's the way it is. We look back upon a stretch of period in our lives and it seems like it just went fleeting by. So is it because of the purpose that he was working for that made it seem like it was just a few days? Or is this notion about that it seemed like a few days only appear that way in retrospect? So here we have an interesting comment in number 2 from Samuel David Luzzatto. Samuel David Luzzatto was a 19th century Jewish Italian commentator and poet. And he wrote this about this verse. During the period of his working, it seemed to him that the time was short when compared to the value of the anticipated reward, which was tremendous in his eyes. Additionally, these were peaceful and sweet days as he exulted in his love and expectation. And there is no greater good than hope. And we're going to explore a little bit about what is the nature of this hope that Luzzatto is using here in his commentary. And to explore that a little bit further, more deeply, we're going to look at something that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote in his book, Dignity of Difference. And that's in number 3 on your study sheet. One of the most important distinctions I have learned in the course of reflection on Jewish history is the difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is the belief that things will get better. Hope is the belief that together we can make things better. Optimism is a passive virtue. Hope is an active one. It takes no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to have hope. We're going to take this now outside our religious framework, and we're going to look at some studies that have been done in the field of psychology. So if you have the study sheet, you can turn it over, and we'll look at number 4, which is a quote from an article called Distinguishing Hope and Optimism by Fred Bryant and Jamie Savegnos, appeared in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology in 2004. And they wrote this: hope focuses more directly on the personal attainment of specific goals, whereas optimism focuses more broadly on the expected quality of future outcomes in general. Now, I found this quote in an article that appeared recently in the Atlantic magazine written by Arthur Brooks. And Arthur Brooks is a musician, plays the French horn. He's a columnist, and he's a professor of the practice of public leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School, and also is a professor at the Harvard Business School. And so he wrote an article called The Difference Between Hope and Optimism, and said this: in other words, optimism is the belief that things will turn out all right. Hope makes no such assumption, but is a conviction that one can act to make things better in some way. Exploring this notion about hope a little bit further and back into some poetry, I want to read you this poem, which was written by Naftali Hurst Imber around 1878. As long as within our hearts the Jewish soul sings, as long as forward to the east to Zion looks the eye, our hope is not yet lost. It is 2,000 years old, to be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. That is the poem Hatikva, which eventually became adopted as the national anthem of the state of Israel. I think it's significant that Hatikva, the hope, becomes the national anthem for Israel, because as Rabbi Sachs has pointed out, and has, along with our psychologists that have just commented on the notion of hope and contrasting that with optimism, hope is a belief that our lives matter and that we can make a difference. It is an approach that emphasizes human agency in making the world a different place, rather than passively waiting for it to become a better place. And that line that appears in the middle of the poem, our hope is not yet lost, that reminded me of a quote that we discussed a few weeks ago, back actually when we were studying Parshat Bereshit. And it's a quote from James Baldwin. And here again is that quote: not everything is lost. Responsibility cannot be lost. It can only be abdicated. If one refuses abdication, one begins again. So here we have the poem Hatikva and this quote from James Baldwin, which are now bringing together these two really significant concepts and values, which I think drive much of Jewish life. Those two concepts being hope and responsibility. Hope and responsibility describes life as propelled forward by human action. And I think that is very much one of the most significant lessons that we get from reading Torah. And let me return to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs for this concluding comment. And he wrote, faith in Judaism means seeing the world exactly as it is, and yet not giving up the belief that it could be otherwise, if we are ready to act with others to make it so. Faith is realism that has been touched by hope, and hope has the power to transform the world. I want to say, as a way to wrap up this part of our study, that studying with all of you strengthens my hope, because it allows me to see that when one is together with others who are committed to the same set of values, to try and realize a similar vision, that it makes me aware of how possible it is to both transform the world and in the process transform myself as well. So with that, I'd love to open it up for other thoughts and comments and reflections that people have. Anyone in this room want to say something at this? Richard?
I just want to piggyback on what you just said.
A little louder.
The business of action in the world, make a difference. Well, it's one thing perhaps to make a difference by gathering your wits and your resources to do something about climate change. It's also equally important to do just what you're saying. As you change yourself and grow, you become the future self, and you act in such a way that those around you are the new future, and that is activity in the world. The spirituality we engage here brings the best of us forward in our converse with one another, and that's changing the world.
I liked how you said that, Rico. That's wonderful.
Thank you, Richard.
See how it works?
Thank you. Okay. If you'd like to raise your hand, I'd love to call on you of how you may have been provoked. Oh, go ahead, David.
I just want to say that this dedication to Tikkun Olam, well, first of all, I want to say that it's kind of pretty much what you're saying, that the difference between hope and optimism is that hope requires a responsibility to work on the future that you want to be better. And I want to, and everything that Rabbi Sachs says could undergird conservative political values or liberal political values. It's quite clear to me suddenly tonight that Tikkun Olam is not a liberal or necessarily conservative way of looking at the world. There is something about it that distinguishes it from a passive, accepting, subordinate view of the world, but you can work on changing and improving your relationships and yourself and your community with either of those political boxes that people are trapped in.
Thank you, David. And other thoughts and reflections, Steve?
Yeah, I would like to know a little bit about that Brooks.
Arthur Brooks.
Arthur Brooks.
You might. Well,
More about.
Well, he's an interesting fellow. He's obviously very bright. He's a very good writer. I will say this, at an early age, I think it's around the age of 16, he converted to Catholicism after having had what he considered to be a very profound experience. But he actually incorporates a lot of his musical background into some of his writing and how he views the world. So I really encourage you to explore more about him. He's a very interesting character.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's written a lot of very interesting material. Okay. What was it about him that provoked you, that interested you?
Oh, I had worked for the dean of the School of Applied Physics and Engineering at Harvard University. I was his technical assistant. And he was also in the National Academy of Sciences, the chief policy advisor.
How fascinating.
And I had a project which was, he gave me from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the latest vision on how two kinds of reactors would work. One was a fusion reactor and the other was a fast breeder reactor. And he said, compare the two, which one would be the best for the world? So that's like a lot of philosophy.
That would be quite an assignment.
Yeah,
Thank you. And others? Yes, Paul, go ahead and unmute, and then I'll call on Gary.
You know, I'm at the other, always at the other end of the spectrum from this little group. What I look at the word optimism and hope, and I combine that with Jacob. What now? How will you describe him? He's working for somebody that's a swindler. I mean, straight out. And the idea of 7 years doesn't mean anything to Laban, and he's a relative. And so, you know, I just wonder, you know, what he thought of the whole arrangement that was put before him, where how does he handle all? I mean, it's not just a choice between optimism and hope. Maybe there's other feelings like, you know, hey, I'm not getting, I'm dealing with somebody, a tough nut here. And if I compare, he looks to God for help, you know, didn't get much. You know, he had to put his whole 14 years in, no time off. So in a way, there's the basic story. I see it as an old biblical family story where brothers and uncles and all this other stuff. You know, my family wasn't so bad after all.
Well, let me just share this, a couple of things with you. So, Paul, so thank you so much for bringing all those issues up. First of all, what's fascinating is that if you remember, after Jacob discovers that it is Leah that he has been married to rather than Rachel, Jacob says to Laban, "Why have you deceived me?" Yeah. And the very same Hebrew word that's used there for deceive is used in the previous Torah portion where Isaac says to Esau, "Your brother has deceived me." So it's this lovely kind of a point and counterpoint where what Jacob has done, and it appears in the Hebrew through that word deceive, is something that is now being done to him. So here's the interesting thing about Jacob, what makes him such a fascinating character, and why we are Jacob, we are Israel, the people of Israel, is that Jacob is both a dreamer and he's also a strategist. And this notion about dreaming, sometimes people who are dreamers are not skilled in being able to actualize and realize and execute on their dreams. On the other hand, Jacob is someone who's quite skilled in being able to have a goal, to work towards that goal, and to fulfill that goal. In fact, what we're seeing is, here's what's really fascinating. If you remember, at the very end of this portion, God tells him to go back to the land of his ancestors. So where's he going to? He's going back to Beersheba, which is where his father and his mother are. Where has he gone in order to kind of get going on this journey that he's on? Haran. Wait a minute, I remember all that stuff about Haran, right? That's where Abraham left from. God said, leave from this place that's familiar to you, where your ancestors are from, Haran. So we have this lovely, fascinating journey that begins with Abraham leaving Haran in order to start something new and find himself. And now we have Jacob as part of his journey of starting something new and finding himself going to Haran. And so the latter image is so fascinating that we see it in our Torah portion with the angels going up and then coming back down. Now that's who Jacob is. He is going to go through these series of really heroic, hopeful steps in his lives. And then he's going to have this kind of descent where he's going to become, we'll see later on, very passive, very, very bitter. And so he's the one who oscillates between greatness and the depths of insignificance and grievance. So he's this character who's carrying with him and acting out the spectrum of behavior and emotions. And that is what we carry with us. Okay, so Richard, you had something?
Yes, well, don't forget that he gets deceived, and what does he do? He pulls this other ruse, and he leaves a rich man with a bunch of speckled cows, speckled sheep. But I want to say that about Jacob, why is he in Haran? Why does he go to Haran? Because Rachel has arranged it to go back there and get a wife from my family. Now, her family Rebecca, her family, to get Rachel, her family, Rebecca's family, and Rachel's family are Abraham's family. And this is these mothers of Israel that are arranging where the lights are coming from. And who is her child? Rachel's child? Well, Joseph. And where are his bones? Well, they're up there in Shechem. But what I noted is that the scene when Jacob gets and sees Rachel, has two pieces to it there. One is it's exactly the same as when Abraham's man goes and sees Rebecca. She comes to water the flock and gives him water. And now when Jacob goes there, he says there's water, and when all the flocks are here, then we open it. But when Rachel comes to have the thirst of the flock of Israel, he understands, and he goes out there and moves the rock, which is like a pillar, and it's the flock of Israel that's being served by this gesture. And then, so there's something going on with these two people. They know what's going on, and their destiny has brought them together, and Joseph's bones are in Shechem.
Thank you. Let me call on Gary. And go ahead, Gary.
Thank you. I had a question and a comment, but I first want to say that, Paul, I appreciate that you are on the other end of the spectrum, because it kind of makes a full family to have you on the other end. And the other thing I love about this group is that we also have people in this group that are in various dimensions of the spectrum that we're in, that really keeps things exciting. My question in Tikkun Olam is mentioned quite a bit. And I'm asking, is there not another part, Tikkun Olam, which is, I guess, one definition is repairing the world, but is it not repairing the world under God or under God's, I don't know what the word is, but I thought that I've read that there's more to it than that, with God's guidance or under God's rule, or am I wrong on that?
Is there a difference?
Well, Tikkun Olam is a term that has evolved over time. And the way I understand it is that the world that we live in is by necessity a fractured world. And you can think of it either in terms of human relationships, or you can think of it as social relationships, or you can think of it in terms of our own personal psyche, is that we are in many ways split and divided and have competing and contending feelings and impulses and so forth. So in that sense, it is fractured. And our assignment, if you will, is to spend our lives ever trying to heal and bring together all these broken parts, whether it's the brokenness within us, the brokenness that in our relationships with another human being, or on a more social level, the brokenness that exists within a community. So thank you for asking about that.
Excellent. Okay.
Anna, did you have something that you wanted to share?
Yes.
I'm sorry, did you have more, Gary?
Just a quick comment, just because hope was mentioned so many times that it's a fun story, or just a different way of helping understand what hope is. In Israel, my understanding, I've heard this more than once, is that in the early days of Israel, it was very difficult to get a phone installed. And there's a story of a guy who went to the public works to ask and fill out the forms to get a phone, and they told him it would be about 6 months. And the guy said, "Is there no hope to get it sooner?" And the public works person said, "Sir, there's always hope. There is no chance, but there's always hope."
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Let me call on Anna, and then I'll call on Susan. Yeah.
Well, just briefly, I'm thinking of Jacob as a border crosser. You know, he exists in his father's house, and then he exists in his mother's family's house, and then he goes back again. And he has a ladder dream, and he goes up and he goes down. So he has this connection between different places and countries. And he has a connection with God back and forth. And you were saying that we are Jacob, we are Israel. So that's really lovely to know that you can, it isn't, it's a connection with God as well as each other that helps us to repair things. And the other thing I wanted to say really quickly is that stone that Jacob moved is really big, and it's about a foot or more thick. And Rabbi and Richard Kramer and I all saw that very rock at that very well up in Shechem. And I want to say that the place had the most vibration, or it wasn't like a vibration, but a vibe of love. It was the sweetness around that well was palpable. And I just think that's a great testament to the ladder effect, right?
Lovely. Thank you. Susan?
So I just wanted to say in response to what Paul said and what you said was that, and I noticed something in this at the beginning of this Torah portion that I haven't really noticed before, and that is it was a setup that when a setup for get you prepared for what's going to come. And it was when Jacob goes and talks with Laban for the first time, and he tells him the whole, it doesn't tell us what he told him. It says he told the whole story. And then he says, oh, you really are from my family. And I went, what? So we know now Jacob was a deceiver and Laban was a deceiver, and
Absolutely.
we're all going to go from there.
Yeah, similar to what Paul said.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And Margot, go ahead, share with us.
But just as a concluding thought, perhaps, my mother-in-law had a wonder with regard to Jacob and the time passing. My mother-in-law had a wonderful expression: the days drag and the years fly.
There we go.
Go ahead.
To piggyback on what Anna said.
Nice and loud.
Piggyback on something Anna said about Jacob being here and being there and being up and being down. The line in there when he says, God is in this place and I did not know it. And my thought was, well, right, wherever you are, this place where my feet are, God's there. And Jacob was one who figured that out.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
And I'm just want to say this is a bit of conclusion, which is that I'm so grateful that we come together to study and share one another's thoughts and reflections about all this material and about our lives. It really enhances my own sense of hope. So thank you all very much. Be well.
It's
Bless
amazing
you all.
how much we learn in just 1 hour a week.
Okay.
This hour is so packed full.
Thank you so much. Be well, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you
Bye-bye.
next week, hopefully. Be well. God bless.
Rabbi here.